Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. To each according to his faith. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 3, we read, "Everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God." It is a common experience shared by most people that when a person errs, he experiences a desire to hide that error from his consciousness instead of holding it up for purification. Error clutches its misdeeds to itself and resists correction, though it is only in a state of purity that we can achieve perfect freedom. It requires an act of will to offer that awareness up to the light and to hold it there until one's inner darkness is completely dissipated. For every state of consciousness has its own attractive power, and the more we allow that attraction to act upon us, the more we attract to ourselves the objective circumstances and experiences natural to it. Our faith is the attractive power of our underlying state of consciousness. Goodness attracts goodness. It takes goodness even to see goodness. Evil attracts evil, and it takes evil even to see evil. That is, to take special note in its existence. Whatever there is in you of darkness or light, offer it up to the heights. In the supreme light alone will we find salvation. Accept nothing less in yourself as your lasting reality. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 12th chapter, "Cling thou to me, clasp me with heart and mind, so shall thou dwell surely with me on high. But if thou droops from such height, if thou best weak to set body and soul upon me constantly, despair not, give me lower service, seek to reach me, worshipping with steadfast will. And if thou canst not worship steadfastly, work for me, toil in works pleasing to me, for he that laboreth right for love of me shall finally attain. But if in this thy faint heart fails, bring me thy failure." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, great souls. This talk to me just the essence of the spiritual path, it seems, each according to his faith. I was reading a thing the other day, actually I saw it, and it was a man talking about his life in Ireland when he was growing up in Ireland as a Catholic. And he said he moved to a new city. And as a young boy, he was 4 years old, and his parents said, "I want you to go to the church and introduce yourself." So as a little boy, he walks over to the church, and he said there's this huge wooden door, and he bangs on the door. And he said the door opens, and there's a nun standing there, big, big nun. And he said her black robes are flapping in the breeze and stuff, and she looks down at him and goes, "Yeah, what do you want?" And he looks up at her and he says, "My parents said I should come over here." And she looks at him again and says, "Well, are you a good boy?" And he's looking at her, and he kind of looks behind her, and he sees this man nailed on a cross behind her. And he looks at the nun and says, "I'm a very good boy. I'm just the best." And he said that was kind of his first introduction to religion. And he said a few months later he was at his uncle's funeral, and he said he was wandering around. He was like 4 or 5 years old. He wasn't very old. And he was wandering through these legs, and he came out to the casket, and they were lowering the casket into the ground. And he looks up at this priest, and this priest is going, "In the name of the Father and of the Son, and into the hole he goes." And he said for years that was what he said. And then he finally was corrected on it and said, "It's not holes, it's ghost." And he goes, "You mean there's a ghost?" But in childhood, for a lot of, I posted this on my Facebook page, and a lot of the people that I grew up with, I grew up Catholic, said, "Oh yeah, I was just petrified of nuns and priests. It just scared the daylights out of me." And I thought, well, I didn't have that experience. I grew up in a very small town in eastern Washington, and there was an Irish priest that was there who was a friend of the family. Just the sweetest guy. It was just, I grew up with kind of an interior life, so I kind of had that. There was a little bit of fear, and of course I knew I could pray, and I had this belief in God. I didn't really know what it was. And of course, you kind of, you reach adolescence, and it's kind of, your peer pressure takes over, and there's a lot of things that you do that you don't want anybody to know. You're sure not going to tell your parents that you're going out drinking, and especially with 5 brothers, like when I grew up, it was pretty wild, and you just, for one reason or another, you didn't tell your parents what you were doing. And the same with God or religion. I mean, sure, it was there, but it was out there somewhere, You didn't have to worry about it too much. And so you go through your life, and you finally reach that point in your life where you begin to think, okay, now, what is God? What is this religious thing? You begin to look at yourself a little bit more realistically and think, what is it? And like the reading says, a lot of it, we don't go to God because of fear or whatever. We're scared of the light. And I says, basically it's because we're a little bit maybe ashamed of what we've done, ashamed of what we do, that we're not living that quote-unquote perfect life. And I began to think about that, about what is faith and what is attachment. There's in 1993, Kriyananda down at Ananda Village had about 5 or 6 different devotees of Yogananda come and give talks. And one of them was Peggy Dietz, who was Yogananda's chauffeur for years. And she gave, it's online, and I highly suggest that you go online and watch these people, because they all talk about these different, every single person's relationship with Yogananda was completely different, but they all kind of said the same thing. He was just so genuine and so real. And the point that I was trying to make is, it doesn't matter what your faults are. Yogananda didn't even care what your faults were. Yes, he wanted you to be sincere, but it was like, yeah, do what you can. There are a lot of people that would meditate for hours and still were not quite in tune. Other people hardly meditated at all, and yet Yogananda said they're almost free, they're almost liberated. And people would ask him, how is that possible? They're not meditating. And he said, because they're in tune. And that's what really faith is attunement to the Master. But Peggy Dietz was telling this story. She said she would drive him around L.A. all the time. And she said one time she was driving down the road, and all of a sudden he said, stop, stop, stop. And there was a bunch of construction going on over at this little place. So he walked inside and went in and talked to the construction people and stuff, and came back out and got back in the car and was telling Peggy, he says, oh, there's a beautiful bar going in there. You should see what they're doing to this bar in there. It's just absolutely beautiful. And Peggy's kind of looking at him and, oh, okay, yeah. And but a little bit later, she said she was with him in an interview room. And she said this woman came in, and she said she just couldn't believe it. She was just so pompous and just so full of herself, and telling Yogananda what a great vegetarian diet she had, and just how perfect it was. And Peggy said, you know, Master was looking at her, and he looked at Peggy, and he kind of went like this, but so the other person could hear. And she says to Peggy, well, I guess we should have made her a ham sandwich. It probably would have helped her a little bit. And I thought, yeah, he wanted people that were genuine. It didn't matter, it didn't matter the things outside that we think are spiritual, like doing all these outward things to get our life right. Yes, they're good. They're good if we're attuned. But, the bottom line is you do the best you can. And if your heart's in the right place, eventually those things that are bugging you are going to fall off. But it's holding yourself up to the light that's really the important thing. I remember one of the people down at Ananda who used to be Kriyananda's secretary said it was really, really hard to be around Kriyananda all the time, because he said it was like you had a light shining on you all the time. And every time you'd think these things you didn't think were quite right, it was like the light was right there, and you're like, oh, But it's there's that level. But once you release yourself to it and realize that, it's all about being in the light, that's where the joy comes from. Once you kind of release that hold on the ego, then it becomes a great blessing. But at first it's really, really hard. Because that's basically what the ego is. The ego is just a little lie. It tells you that things are a little bit different than they really are. The ego is the soul attached to the body. And it's telling you all the time that things are different than what they really are. And once we begin to get a hold of that is when we really begin to get free. Yogananda was just basically a very genuine person. That's what all these people said that were around him. And the blessings that flowed from him were just fantastic if you were in tune with him. And that is our challenge. What is faith? What is attunement? There's the story of Jesus where that healing of Jesus when he was walking in a big crowd and somebody touched him, and Jesus stopped and said, who touched me? And his disciples were standing around and going, what? There's hundreds of people around here touching you. What do you mean, who touched you? And Jesus said, no, I felt power go out of me. And out of all those people, and I'm sure they're all very sincere, she was in tune and was able to receive his vibrations. And I've wondered about that. What is that? What is that attunement? And part of it, I think most of it is just opening ourselves up to something higher than ourselves, to a reality greater than what our little ego tells us. We all know that the easiest way out of our little quote-unquote hellhole is to serve a greater reality. And once you begin to serve that greater reality, all those huge things that you thought were so important in your life slowly begin to just fade away. I remember I made my first trip to India in 2005, and I still remember seeing all these people around who have absolutely nothing, living on the streets, and so many of them were so happy. And I kept thinking to myself, the best thing in the world for Americans, every high school kid, would be to go to India, wander around the streets of India, and just see how these people live. And you begin to realize it's not about the things you acquire that's going to make you happy. It's about the attitude you have. It's about sharing your life and living it, open and above, and living it for other people. Because once you do that, you have a life. And until you get to that point, you can't really let the light in. It's just you're just kind of hit and miss. There's a lot to be said for like growing up in a Catholic church and having that outward form, especially when you're a young child growing up, because I think you need it. It's like I said, it doesn't have to be quite as strict, but I've seen kids that grow up that don't have that ability to go inside, that don't know it's there, that don't know that there's a greater reality than themselves, and their lives are just a mess. And it's really hard to try to get them to open up to a greater reality because they just don't, it's a mystery to them. They just don't get it. And it's a blessing to have a guru, to know that, there is a greater reality than yourselves that we're all tied to. And we all come into this world together, and we all leave this world in the same way. And we're all tied together. And you can just take a look around the world today and realize very few people believe it. That's not really true. I think almost everybody believes it. Everybody's got it in their head. But when you look at the world today, you realize nobody practices it. Can you imagine what would happen if people were like the people sitting in this room and really tried to bring Christ's teachings, Yogananda's teachings into a reality and made it work in their lives? This whole world would change. And it's all right there, but we just quite haven't got, I don't know, maybe we just haven't gotten pushed around enough and whacked around enough, because a lot of times that's what it takes, When I came on a spiritual path, that's what it took for me. I had to get to the point where my life was a complete mess, and it was just like, wham, wham, slap myself a couple times and wake up, what are you doing, And I think the world is a little bit like that too. We need to get to that point where we begin to realize, what are the realities in life? What are the major things that we need to do? And for us, again, it's just as simple as holding ourselves up to the light and not being afraid of your faults. I mean, it takes goodness to see goodness, and it takes evil to see evil. Interesting story once. I was with Swami Kriyananda at Ananda. This was years ago, and a friend of ours had been in a major car accident and had just gotten out of the hospital and was basically diagnosed with AIDS, and she had less than a year to live. And I knew that. Everybody knew that. And she finally got out of the hospital, and there was some kind of reception at Swami Kriyananda's. Not for her, but something else was going on. And she walked into the room, same room with Kriyananda. They saw each other across the room. And for about 15 seconds, Swami and her just stared at each other. And finally, Swami bowed his head a little bit to her. And I thought, oh, how sweet. Well, there was another person in the room who saw that. And she said years later, oh, Swami gave her a long sexual look. And when I read that, I thought, are you kidding me? But again, that was the level she was on. That's all she could see. And we are like that. Our perception is not pure. Until you hold yourself up to the light. That's one of the reasons why you shouldn't judge people. I mean, if you see somebody doing something that you identify with, it's because you have it within yourself. Otherwise, like I've said before, if you see somebody doing something and you think, that's just goofy, what is that he's doing? I don't get it. It's because you don't have it inside yourself. You don't have that quality of whatever that person is doing. You wouldn't recognize it. It would just be totally foreign to you. But because you recognize it, it's one of the reasons why you shouldn't judge, because you're bound to relive it again in your life. I mean, it's, our reality is not totally pure when we're tied to the ego, when we're tied to that body attachment. And until the light shines on there, shines into our lives, and our perspective begins to change, and we begin to see that other reality, you'll make bad decisions. It's just, people will do that. But I think that's the call I think that Yogananda has to all of us, is to just kind of wake up, be real, just hold yourself up to the light. That's all you have to do. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of courage. And it's a lot of the reason why people don't come onto the spiritual path, because you have to look at yourself honestly. I remember one of the brothers at SRF said, true humility is exact correspondence with reality. And it's like, it's true. You know, once you see yourself totally honest, totally for what you are, you know, that you're in tune with everybody around you, there is no reason to be pompous. There is no reason to be anything other than good. So that's our task, and that's each of us according to our faith. That's our mission. And it's a good mission, because once you begin to get that into your life, you've got a reason to live. And like Yogananda gave us these teachings to go inside and to go deep and to find it inside. And yeah, maybe it takes a while, maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable with your meditations, but there's that great saying from Edgar Cayce that I just love. Find yourself in God, lose yourself in service. Lose yourself in service, find yourself in God. You simply cannot change. You can't separate the two. If your sadhana is horrible, doesn't work, find a way to serve. If you're serving and it's not working and it just doesn't feel right, meditate more. I mean, it's just, you can't separate the two. They will bring you to the light. And that's all I have to say. I wanted to read, this is a reading from Whispers from Eternity. Make me the butterfly of eternity. I have burnt my past, destroying every seed of evil destiny. I have stridden bravely through the strewn ashes of my past and future fears. I am the eternal now, having torn to shreds my enclosing cocoon of ignorance with the sharp knife of free will. Now I am thy soaring butterfly of eternity, fleeting freely through immeasurable skies of time. The beauty of my wings I spread out through nature everywhere, to entertain all beings. My wings are sprinkled with suns and stardust. Lo, I am beautiful. May every silken thread that shrouded my past folly be severed forever. See thy trail now behind me, only adding to my beauty as I wing my way to my own self in thee.